Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. Good morning, Southern California. My name is Doug Brunke here at Venice Beach. Welcome to Global Chamber. Welcome to a Globinar that we are calling for manufacturers and exporters, strategic responses and workarounds to changing tariffs. So even as we speak, there are all sorts of changes going on, including the deal with Japan that happened overnight or appeared to happen overnight. We're going to be talking about the current status, but we're going to be talking about it primarily from the perspective of you as a manufacturer, you as an exporter. What are some of the things you need to be thinking about? What are some tips and techniques for you to consider? And certainly, who should you be connecting with, as an exporter to be as successful as you can be? I think I need a cup of coffee. I'll get through the language. This English language can be really tricky. You've reached Global Chamber. We're headquartered in Phoenix, Arizona, and I've been in Phoenix, Arizona as the CEO and founder, but I've moved to Southern California. And one of the really great things about that is I've been able to meet with a variety of members here in Southern California who are amazing. Anita Rodell and Elizabeth Glenn are two of them that have pulled this program together under the leadership of Dr. Sarita Jackson. So they're all in this room today. They'll all be participating for the next 50 or so minutes. We will be wrapping up at about 55, or at least that's the plan, local time 11:55. And those of you from around the world, feel free to participate during the Q&A section, which will be in the second half of this program. Thank you to all of the members who have been participating and pulling this series together. This is the first of several. The next one is being scheduled for September. And if anybody in the audience who's been part of that can give a little bit more guidance on that as we get toward the end of this today, please let us know. Oh, sounds like somebody's having a party.
Oh, sorry.
I
apologize. A group of people just walked in, but they're leaving now. I'll turn off my mic.
Well, Jim will be on it and in mute. Thanks, Jim, in advance. So before I introduce our keynote speaker, I do have an apology on behalf of David Harlow, who is the president of ITC Diligence International. He is one of the members of Global Chamber that everybody here should know. If you don't, the free trade zone expertise that he has is unparalleled, and it's critically important for business here in Southern California. He has been instrumental in pulling this program together, but he texted us this morning, or emailed, I guess it was an email, and he mentioned that he has an emergency problem with one of their clients with a customs issue that he needed to address priority one. And so several of us stepped forward, including me and Anita and Elizabeth, primarily the three of us, to say we'll cover you, because we have a very knowledgeable and important speaker today. His name is Vincent Jacopella. And you probably know him as well, but if you don't, he's the president of trade and government. He's the trade. What is he? Trade and government relations. President, trade of. Oh, I see. Okay, now so there's I think a missing comma. So I believe he's the president of trade and government relations at Alba Wheels Up International. And he and I were talking earlier today. I know Alba Wheels Up International very well because it's originally headquartered in one of my hometowns. Vincent is very familiar with that. He is in a Southern California boy these days. He's been here since he was age 20. When he's not scaring celebrities underneath the Malibu Pier, he's an extraordinarily knowledgeable thinker around trade and is able to maneuver not only his own company but others through these challenges that we're facing. And so we thought he would be an outstanding keynote speaker for our first of this series. So he's going to be giving a presentation for about 20, 25 minutes. If you have a question, I'd ask you to please raise your hand, and then we'll have about 20 or 25 minutes afterwards to handle your questions. Vince, does that work for you? Did I say
Yeah, that's
anything
great.
terribly wrong?
No, thanks for having me, and great to see so many faces from Southern California again. So this is great. Really happy to be here.
Well, what would you like to share with us today? There's so many opportunities around the world, and that's how Global Chamber was formed, to encourage exporters to recognize that the world is our onion. We can get it if you know the right people and you do the right things. However, there's always challenges, and today we have kind of a new series of challenges, including tariffs. What would you like to share with us today?
Yeah, it's not often. I did move from back east to LA when I was 20, and I spent most of my career on trans-Pacific imports from Asia coming in. But it's not often you get to talk to exporters about import tariffs, right? There is a nexus, and I think it's really important to note that in Alba, but also in my 33-year career, we've always had a subset of importers that are sell consumer products. They sell directly to consumer, they sell to retailers. And then there are importers that are manufacturing and bringing in their inputs from manufacturing. They're importing those from outside the country, and those are subject to tariffs. So that's what I'll focus on today is mostly how this affects importers who are manufacturing, because ultimately the cost of their parts going into the process will, by every law of economics, it should affect the global sell price of the product on the global market. So if certain parts are costing more, so I'll focus on what the challenges are, and then we like to always, we have a rule inside of Alba: when you talk about the challenge, you have to talk about the opportunity to solve the issue and mitigate the issue. So we'll talk about the challenges as well as the some opportunities to manage that manufacturers can use to mitigate and manage strategically this. So happy to talk about this.
Yes, Gilda, Justin Smith, Lee and Associates. I'm good. I
Hello, Justin. How are you? Thank you, Jim, for catching that. So that sounds great, Vince. How would you like to proceed?
Well, I definitely want to make this an interactive Q&A at the end, and we don't want to be reading off slides. But what happens, when you're giving an update of this issue, if there's over 60 countries getting a letter and some get a letter and some don't, sometimes it's helpful to see a color chart to say these countries have a letter, these don't. So if you want to start the slide deck, we will not be reading off the deck, but we could point to it in some of the discussions, right?
Fantastic.
So if we just go to the next slide, I'll start off with a now, full disclosure, when we talk about these things in this environment, um, we really have to put a marker down that this is as of last Thursday, right? And there's already changes that came out with Japan this morning and last night that my team, very graciously updated. So we have some new stuff, new information about Japan, and that came out last night. So I mean, basically, if I took a microcosm of the last 4 weeks, right? We're not going to go all the way back to April 1 of where the movement has been in the last 4 weeks, and how that, and I will tie it to how that affects manufacturers in the US and abroad. And then at the end, we'll give like 6 or 7 strategies about what manufacturers who are importing can do. So I think many of you might have different levels of information. So many of you might know a lot of this already. So we had with Mexico and the European Union, and 2 weeks ago, there was talk about 30%, if an agreement is not reached eventually. We also, U.S. said that they would also do some retaliatory tariffs against those two countries. 25 countries have, in the last 2 weeks, have received letters that said, if we don't have a deal in place by this date, we will go back to the IEEPA retaliatory tariffs. And if we go to the next slide, we could just talk to that, and then we'll get to it. So yeah, I want to focus on Canada, Mexico, Vietnam, because that's where there's a lot of action right now. So there were talks about a week and a half ago um, about goods that are not subject to the free trade agreement would get a Canada would get would put a 50% retaliatory, but then there's been some backing off that, and you'll see that on August 1. So that's still in flux, what's going to happen. There was also talk, and we will talk about this later on. It's really important to follow because on the nearshoring strategy and on the foreign trade agreement strategy, Canada and Mexico could play a large role. So you definitely want to know what's eligible and what's not eligible. And so you definitely want to follow that. There was talk as well about splitting. It's talk about a lot of things, right? But I mean, you have to wait till see what comes out in the USTR, what comes out in the Federal Register, what messages we get about how much duties are when we pay them. So there was talk about splitting USMCA, so having a separate agreement with Mexico and a separate agreement with Canada, right? About this time 2 weeks ago. So I think we're scheduled for a reboot for USMCA in 26, and we'll see if that's going to be a reboot for both countries or if there's going to be pressure to split the agreement between the two countries. China, who, like I said, I spent a lot of my career doing China and Vietnam. China has till August 12th. There was another deferment to August 12th. Apparently, there's been a framework for a deal, but we don't have the details. And if there's no new deal by August 12th, I believe everything defaults back to the original higher tariffs. And Vietnam, there's a lot of questions that manufacturers have, U.S. manufacturers, about inputs from Vietnam because there's a word in the last executive order called transshipment. And the classic, Elizabeth knows this, Dave Harlow, if he was on, knows it. Many of you know the classic definition of transshipment is I bring goods from China and I bring them to Vietnam, and then um, I export them as origin Vietnam. Transshipment is illegal. The transshipment is really defined as the country of origin. So when this word showed up in the agreement, there still is some confusion whether the definition of transshipment will change because transshipment is already regulated where you just declare the country of origin. So if you export it out of Vietnam and they were Chinese goods, you'd have to declare that the origin was China and that the duty rates for China would apply. So they're kind of like already solved. The other reason transshipment is probably mentioned is that there's going to be a change in the definition. And that change in the definition will affect manufacturers because if the definition means that if the exporter in Vietnam has Chinese ownership or that there are Chinese inputs in the Vietnamese inputs, then that could trigger a different tariff rate, right? So it's very complicated. Sounds complicated because it is complicated, and that's why a lot of U.S. manufacturers that are dependent on foreign inputs are struggling with their experts and with their teams to make sense of this. So stay tuned for what transshipment means. It might mean ownership. It might mean that a factory in Vietnam owned by China gets the China rate, right? Um, I'm not, that's not in stone, it's just what's being discussed. 232, Section 232 is really important. We do a lot of microchips and semiconductor companies in Alba, and there are a lot of steel and aluminum on there. if you're a manufacturer that has steel and aluminum, you probably already have been affected by this. Uh, these are they're not the IEPA duties, these are the 232 duties. And so those are in effect and adding cost. 50% on copper starting August 1. So if inputs on if you're dependent on inputs from copper, those are 50. The pharmaceuticals are finished products, so we'll just keep going to the next slide. And we only have two more. You could just fast forward the next one. So you'll see these are all the countries listed that that were originally part of the reciprocal tariff, and then got delayed to August to July 9-ish, and then August 1, and you'll see that the ones in red as of last week got a letter stating that if you don't have a deal in place, we're going to default to the other. So this is useful if it's a quick cheat sheet. Um, as I disclosed in the beginning, some of these are already outdated. So there's been as of last Thursday, there's been some adjustments here. But this is what I just came out of some strategy sessions in the Midwest yesterday. I don't want to say the vertical that I was talking to, because if I say the town and the vertical, the brands might be recognizable. But they're every day they're just doing this, right? Like recalculating, because they are manufacturing in the US and they are heavily dependent on Trans-Pacific components. So when these things change, the cost of manufacturing changes. So if we could go to the next slide. I'll just do quickly on Japan because it broke yesterday. 15%. We haven't. We This is a framework. We haven't seen any official notices yet. No Federal Register notice yet that I know of. No U.S. Trade Representative notifications. So Japan will pay 15%, including autos. Um, uh, Japan will supposedly make a $550 billion investment in the U.S. Apparently, the U.S. will keep 90% of the profits. Not sure how we would monitor that. Japan will open its markets to U.S. cars, trucks, and rice from California, supposedly. And U.S. Auto is already raising concerns today um, about the balance there. There was a quick stock market reaction, to that, and that's just something to be aware. If you have inputs from Japan, it looks like that rate just went down, depending what's happening. So if we keep going, I want to get to the part where we start solving the issues and not just talking about the problems. So we could go to the next slide. So, like, what are the strategies? There are free trade agreements. There was a big debate on April 2nd or 7th, because there was like two tranches in April. There was a big debate in the trade about um, does it affect foreign trade agreements? The answer is yes and no, because it doesn't erase. So these tariffs are on top of the base rate. So if you have a foreign trade agreement already, these tariffs go on top of that. They don't cancel the foreign trade agreement. So that was a semantic, and I don't know if there's a lot of attorneys on here. I don't want to offend anybody, but a lot of attorneys were arguing back and forth about, it doesn't erase the foreign trade agreement. It does. Basically, if you're a manufacturer, you want to know the bottom line. What is it going to cost me, right? Like, do I still have a preference in the foreign trade agreement? You do at the base rate, right? But the foreign trade agreement doesn't get you out of the additional tariff, right? So so both people were right. Having said that, they still should be leveraged in our view at Alba. They still should be leveraged. They still should be leveraged for um, the fact that they're still in effect, right? So it is a viable way to to mitigate paying less. I mean, there's a hearing coming up on AGOA, which is the African Growth Partnership, African Growth Initiative that offers duty free. There's some hearing coming up on Caribbean Basin, so you can still get some goods under foreign trade zones that would be duty free. So when you're talking to your broker, your attorney, your internal strategy, you definitely want to maybe source material from these places that have the preference. So that would be USMCA, Canada, Mexico, certain agreements in the EU, Caribbean Basin Initiative, other things like that. And we could talk about more of that in the Q&A. If you're going to nearshore, Canada and Mexico, you'll be highly dependent on the USMCA, which is a free trade agreement, right? What happens there? There's also something called the first sale rule. It's used in apparel a lot on finished goods. I don't see why you couldn't apply it to manufacturing inputs, which allows you to legally pay on a lower value of the import. And the way you would do that is you would go back further up the supply chain to the first price of the manufacturer instead of the person who sold it to you. And there are rules around how that works, but it's something that's worth talking to. It's something that's worth discussing for sure. We see a lot of folks even before this happened. A lot of folks before this happened were already diversifying the supply chain for different reasons, for congestion, for all these other issues, geopolitical issues, canal issues, Suez issues, Panama Canal. There were other disruptions, resiliency disruptions happening, and so many folks were already sourcing from different regions. So if you getting your parts 100% from China, it's probably a good idea to have other options, like to start looking at Thailand and to start looking at Vietnam or Mexico. I do know some tech companies are starting to try and source within the US, get their parts in the United States. The issue that I keep hearing is that the US suppliers of some of those parts don't have the capacity to meet the demand, right? So they have to go outside the country for certain parts, depending on what they are. But diversifying the supply chain is really important. If you could go to the next slide. Yeah, so nearshoring and onshoring. Everybody there's a lot of SoCal folks on the call, and we all know that we're only an hour and a half, 2 hours from the Otay Mesa crossing, the San Diego crossing. So we like to joke in LA that the ocean port of entry for Baja is really Long Beach, LA Long Beach, because that's where all the containers come in and they go inbound to the southern border. And the reason that happened so much since 2020, 2021 is that Mexico does have the IMEX bonded system down there where you can do light assembly, you can do light manufacturing, and I think it's one of the more successful models in nearshoring. So you definitely should be looking at Mexico as an option. Moving production closer, people were moving production closer to the U.S. to avoid supply chain disruption issues, but now, if you can get it eligible legally for USMCA, you have this duty preference on your input, right, into manufacturing. The other thing you could do is kind of defeats the U.S. strategy, the goal of the U.S. strategy. You could do all the manufacturing in Mexico, right, and just assemble it there and see if you get it eligible for USMCA. Drawback is trickier. many exporters are familiar with drawback, where you can get a refund of duties paid on imported goods that are later exported, right? So you could do drawback if you sell it abroad, if you send it abroad, but it also you're eligible for any duty you paid on inputs. So manufacturing drawback is a really viable option that you should look into. What's tricky about the last 6 months is that some of the reciprocal tariffs and some of the emergency tariffs, national security tariffs, are not eligible for drawback. So before you start factoring in using drawback to save on the cost, you need to talk to your customs broker or your trade attorney about if those duties are actually eligible for the refund, right? Because some of them are not. Anti-dumping duties are not. A lot of the Section 232 are not. I'm sure that David, if he was here last week, he talked a lot about foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses. He is absolutely the expert, I think, in the whole country. And we saw a lot of people doing it foreign trade zone and bonded warehouse, mostly bonded warehouse, when the duties were changing rapidly, right, up and down, and certain folks were kind of like waiting it out, and then so if for instance I got if your boat came in at a very high duty and you thought that it was going to get a reprieve, some people were trying to wait it out. Some people still are. And then so it's definitely a strategy. You could also manufacture and assemble in the foreign trade zone, which would be interesting. If we go to the next slide there. We talked about the FTAs, the free trade agreement. I think the big one would be USMCA. Mexico, Canada, I think we talked about that. I think the first sale rule is a repeat and diverse. So this is actually a repeat slide. So that we could just keep going. Yeah, nearshoring, bonded facilities, and then I think one more after, or that might be the end of it. Yeah, so you could open it up for Q&A, and I know it was a lot, but those are like the 7 usual suspects that U.S. manufacturers can use to mitigate the cost of the inputs. I'd be happy to talk about the strategies that the companies I see are employing in the Q&A. What's really happening on the ground? How do you apply these to inside your strategy? So if you all wanted to open it up for Q&A, that's fine.
Happy to do that. Dr. Sarita Jackson is an extraordinary leader on the global stage, starting from research all the way through getting products from the U.S. outbound, and she's also involved on the import side as well. She's our advisory board chair for Global Chamber Los Angeles chapter. Dr. Jackson, any comments, any thoughts, any questions?
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that presentation. So 2 comments and then a question that I have. I'll keep it very brief. One thing, I'm so glad that you mentioned the free trade agreements, because I'm working with a lot of companies, now US companies, where they're trying to identify new markets. And, one of the solutions is, well, let's start with some of these markets where we have the trade agreements, as you mentioned, the preferential access to those markets, or as you're importing, the duty free. So that's one thing. But one of the things I wanted to kind of shift, because you mentioned AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunities Act, which is not a comprehensive trade agreement, even though it is a preferential trade program.
Right.
And then the Caribbean Basin Initiative, or Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act, whichever one you decide to use, or the later versions of it. And so one thing I want to mention, though, and that's one of the things I'm watching with the AGOA, because for the US side, it's the benefit for the importer, not the exporter, because it's a one-way. So, so we're going to see what happens in September, because it's set to reauthorize, or to expire, but we'll see what happens. I'm not quite sure. Seems like a distant possibility in terms of being reauthorized, right? But you mentioned the Caribbean Basin program, and I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that, and what are you seeing with regard to importers for that benefit from the Caribbean Basin Trade Preference Act, the CBTPA, which is the later version of that?
Well, no, those are great questions, and I think that's worth really diving into. So on AGOA, both it's funny because how they got on my radar again, that AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunities Act, and Caribbean Basin, those both, I think last week, those are coming up for a hearing in Congress. To your point, Sarita, like, is it because they, are they gonna because they like it or they don't like it, right? But they're coming up. So on AGOA, I think that you said it well. I did a lot of apparel,
Right.
being in LA most of the career, and Transpac, and a lot of not a lot of the AGOA was around apparel, and so is Caribbean Basin, right? So the issue there is that, to your point, I don't know how many manufacturing inputs are going to come from this country because they're usually finished goods, right? And then the strategy on the tariffs is really not favoring finished goods. I will say this, having talked to a lot of importers for steel and aluminum, I think there should be more vocal trade advocacy pointing out that import manufacturing inputs should be in a different category than finished goods, because US manufacturers need them to manufacture, right? So I think on AGOA, you're hitting a great point. If the goal is to get more finished goods into the US, maybe that's not the goal of the current administration. On Caribbean Basin, um, I noticed when CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, came in, there was a lot of overlap because some of the countries were the same, or there was some competition. We actually had some stuff that was eligible for both. And again, that's also a program that favors, I think, finished goods coming in. So I don't know like where that would go, but if you could get some inputs from there, maybe fabric, whatever, that was eligible, and you could save some money on it, like, I think it's worth a look.
Yeah. And just quickly, let me just kind of clarify my point about exporters, once you mentioned apparel, because that's what, for both of those, looking at textile and apparel as well, going to these countries and learning about it. And for the US, the yarn and fabric exporters benefit because the finished garment one of the provisions has to include US yarn and fabric. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with regard to those preferential trade programs. But thank you so much.
No,
for
and can
elaborating.
I keep you for one more second, because I think you raise another point, that some of the free trade agreements are treaties, and some of these other things are really preference programs by Congress, right? So
Right.
it's really, they have to, I think if they go away, they have to go away by Congress, right? I'm not the legal expert, but even if someone decided, hey, I don't want to go, or I don't want the Caribbean Basin, I think it's in the law, right? So there would have to
Right.
be
It's at the congressional
a
level.
legislative change to do that,
Yes.
right? Which is maybe why they're having the hearing, but yeah, we got it.
Right. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Rita. Victoria Williams, you mentioned about being a commercial real estate agent, just to be kind of lay out some of the things that Global Chamber is involved with. There is a meeting later today for the global real estate market, and so feel free to jump into that. For every challenge, there is an opportunity, and one of those opportunities is India. We happen in Southern California to have the preeminent expert on the Indian market, particularly for US companies or any companies going into India. That's Gunjan Bagla. Gunjan, did you have a thought or a question, please?
Yes, absolutely. So it is great to hear you again, Vincent. I've attended some previous webinars where you gave some great input during the pandemic. As Doug mentioned, I specialize in US-India business. And my first question, I have a couple of three related questions. So on July 13th, the Wall Street Journal had a major article with the title that your next lawn chair might come from Vietnam. And they were really focused on this issue of transshipment, where products from China are getting into Vietnam and then making their way to the US. Do you see right now, when you put up that chart of tariffs, it seemed the Vietnam tariff was higher than the proposed Chinese traffic
Yeah, that's
tariff.
actually changed. Somebody from my staff just told me that it's changed with the
Okay.
new deal. But until finish your question though, and then I'll
Yeah.
go.
So
Yeah.
I was wondering what you're seeing in terms of the relationship between China, Vietnam, and the U.S. My lens for this is really India, where you might know that Apple is going to import some $80 billion of iPhones, iPads, AirPads, whatever, computers from India, making a big shift from China away to India, and this has got dozens, if not hundreds of companies very keenly interested in India. But all of them are kind of waiting to see what happens. And the trade deal with India, is a moving target. They said it'd be the first one to get done. I said that wouldn't happen. Then they said July 9th. Now they're saying August 1st. Just wanted to see, where you see that flow happening. Is India going to be a winner in your view, or are they going to end up with, at the losing end?
They could be. The question is, what do they want? I'd love to have an offline with you on this, and I really think you and I should have an offline. I think they could be. The question is, do they want to be in certain industries, right? So if I go back to the pandemic, there was this idea that India would grab all the apparel from China, right? And it actually didn't happen
Yeah.
that way, right? So we hear a couple of things from some of the factories in India that does India want to be a service economy and a tech economy, or do they want to manufacture apparel, right? And secondly, the short, unsophisticated answer to your question is yes, they could actually they have the infrastructure, they have the transport, the ports, they have the finance system. They absolutely can grab capacity from China. And I've seen a lot of electronic bikes move from China to India. So I think it depends on the sector, but the answer is yes. I think it's an opportunity for India if the Indian economy wants to do it. Like I don't know if are they going to want to do, low margin apparel? I don't know. Maybe not. T-shirts, things like that, e-bikes and some more complicated stuff. But the bottom line is as long whoever has a lower duty rate than China has a preference is in a positive, a preference position.
So just to follow up on that, Vincent, I've seen that American manufacturers are very reluctant to change suppliers. They don't mind changing locations, but even when Apple moved their manufacturing from China to India, they continued to work with the Taiwanese parent company that is manufacturing in China and asked them to set up the facilities in India. And I see that across the board, that kind of tendency to, hey, you understand our needs, so go set up a factory in the country that we want to import from. Are you seeing that across the globe?
I see it in tech companies and other sectors where the U.S. manufacturer doesn't want to take the risk of starting all over again. They'll move. You said it. They'll move a country, but they have financial arrangements. They have quality. The other folks know the product. The other thing I think that people are reluctant to sever ties completely is that until you get a long-term, until you know what the tariffs are going to be past 60 days, right? And you know exactly which countries are affected.
Yeah.
Many people are reluctant to make really deep, expensive changes
Right.
to the supply chain. But what you're seeing is exactly what's happening, though. It's amazingly aligned what's happening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Great questions. Gunjan Bagla, definitely someone you should know. The Global Chamber does events. We do over 700 a year, but mainly we make strategic connections. And so all the people you're seeing today are amazing, including our board emeritus, Jeffrey Darr is in the audience, definitely someone you should know. Anita Rodal is another spectacular contact if you're doing international business. Anita, I think you have a question.
I do. And like all good questions, I'll start off with a statement, and that is that I think the definition of security and trade emergencies needs to be refined by Congress because it takes an act of Congress to approve a free trade agreement. But under security and trade emergencies, whatever that actually means, they abdicate some of that control to a president. And if you have a president going lone wolf commando, wreaking havoc, on the tariff situation, I think that's not a good thing. Which leads into my question regarding the USMCA. If they're saying that these new tariffs don't dissolve the USMCA, they go on top, that in essence neuters the USMCA. Or does it fill in gaps for particular types of products that are not covered? So in other words, if it was previously covered under USMCA, that's not affected. Can you
Yeah, so
clarify?
the simple one, and believe me, we're all still learning, but we do have importers that have a lot of steel and aluminum that come over the southern border. So it's USMCA, and this is a rough high level, Anita. So the USMCA is in effect. If you have the USMCA, the reciprocals and the IEPA that you talked about are not subject to that. So that is a lot. That's a broad swath. Whatever's done in USMCA is affected by it. The exceptions would be the 232 steel and aluminum, the section 232, which is a different trigger than IEPA, right? It's another national emergency trigger. So if you have 232, you do get hit, and that's being discussed right now whether those 232 should stack on top of USMCA. The other thing you saw with a lot of US manufacturers is because their product was duty free under the regular rate, they never went to the trouble of validating it for USMCA, right? So now they're like trying to move that to say, hey, it is eligible for the MCA. I just need the certifications. I need all that. But the question you raised is a big one, because really, if you are a U.S. manufacturer and you're relying on steel and aluminum from Mexico or inputs, that the 232 duties are very high, right? And you also have these things called derivatives in there, where only a small piece of the article could have aluminum or steel. And if you can't say what the value is on that or what the origin is, the whole article is on the higher. So yeah, I think it's something that that's one of the questions the trade groups have been asking the government, is like, clarify what stack, they call it stacking, what tariff stacks on top of USMCA and what doesn't.
Thank you, Anita. We have about 10 minutes left, 10 minutes, and we do try to wrap up at 55. And I will give Vince some final comments to the floor. I did get a message that Elizabeth, you have a question, and that's important because Elizabeth, Glenn, and Anita were two of the key leaders who put this series together for Global Chamber. And Anita, by the way, you have an export-import forum coming up, I think. Is it next week or this week?
Tomorrow, and I put the link to register in the chat way at the top. The Export Import Forum this month, I'm interviewing Jade Woolen, and we're talking about trade data. Like, it's so important when you're, especially now with the tariff stuff, to tap into trade data, to know how to use trade data to make strategic decisions in your exporting or importing decisions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Elizabeth, did I see that you have a question?
Yes.
And Phyllis, I see your hand, but Elizabeth takes precedent. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. It's quick and hopefully it'll be beneficial. Vince, as you well know, we have thousands of small and medium-sized manufacturers. Can you provide an example of how the industrial manufacturers can leverage what strategies they can use when they're importing inputs that are critical to their operations and their products?
Yeah, I would go to the 6 or 7 I mentioned, but I'll just give you a real life story from a couple of weeks ago.
Perfect.
A tech manufacturer in Northern California is renegotiating. It is in one of the slides. They're renegotiating their deal with the supplier, and sometimes one might think, oh, just to lower the price, but not really, to structure to structure how the transaction goes. So in other words, you know, are they going to help with transportation? Are they going to be able, to the previous question, which was huge, are they going to be able to still sell the product, but they will source it in Asia from a different country instead of the manufacturer in the US. So they will leverage their resources in Malaysia, Indonesia. So they could do that on their end as well, right? Which is why the ownership issue, once determined, is going to be huge, because if it's based on ownership and not country of origin, that's going to be a whole new world. But Elizabeth, I think that a dialogue with, and then another real life story was that one of a company that I know tried to diversify out of the supplier to these other suppliers. And the lesson there was like 5 other suppliers that could only do 25% of the capacity they needed, right? So the reality is that's the reality, right? Like they're with these suppliers they have now for a reason, right? Because they're doing the job. So those are the two, you know, anecdotal stories from a couple of weeks ago that I can share.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We are a membership organization, and I do want for members to point out a really key resource in the audience, Laura Ragudo of FITT, F-I-T-T, the Forum for International Trade. It's the preeminent export and import training organization in the world that happens to be in Canada, so it's very international. Laura, do you have the ability just to say hi?
Yeah, hello everyone. It's an interesting discussion. Of course, I take the lens. We are a global organization and we have certified professionals all over the world. And our training is country neutral. So it doesn't matter if you're a US manufacturer, Canadian, or manufacturer in Europe or Asia. It's about being strategic to getting your products into other markets. But obviously being in Canada, my perspective is more like Canadian manufacturers and what are they doing now when their buyers, predominantly US buyers, are faced with enormous tariffs. So just the consensus is that like our training, what we've been talking about for 30 years hasn't changed. This is just a new challenge that our exporters are facing and importers. That it's the same, it's market diversification, but being very strategic about market diversification. So that's what our training does. It teaches individuals to analyze the situation, to look at the opportunities, but to determine if it's truly feasible for you to onshore, reshore, you know, export to a new market. There's a lot there, and it starts with understanding all the costs involved, all the scenarios. So that's what we do in a nutshell. So interesting conversation. And I'm hearing the same conversations in Canada and around the globe. So it's if anybody wants to find out more about our training, our website is fitfortrade.com, or a certification of professionals.
Thank you very much, Laura. We only have time. A very quick question. I don't see your last name, Phyllis. I'm going to take a risk and call on you.
Last name is Chastain. Quick question. Being a Boeing employee for many years, I'm interested in the impact on Boeing and the aerospace industry of all these changes. I noticed that there's a Boeing Africa representative on the first presentation for AGOA tomorrow, Boeing Africa. So what do you see as the impact on Boeing and aerospace?
Brilliant question, and that also ties, Vince, into your fundamental question earlier about the understanding by this administration of how industry works, and questioning whether they really understand or care about that.
Yeah, you know, I think that probably the goal shows that they might, you know, they might care about how it works, but maybe with a time frame that it's being executed, you know, it's funny. I just came back from DC and people are really clamoring for collaboration, right? Like get our input on the policy, get our input on how it rolls out, which is how it used to work. You know, we'll tell you what if you want to give us the goal to increase manufacturing, bring manufacturing back, I think that works. But just, you know, let us tell you what it does to the businesses, you know, what the tactical effects are. Boeing, civil aviation is not a huge vertical for Alba, nor me personally. But I know a guy, I actually know a gal who did it on COAC with me. And I just recently learned that they're going to try and get the civil aviation parts exempted from some of this stuff. I'm also going to punt that, you know, some of the larger aerospace manufacturers are talking directly to the administration about their individual situations. So I think that they've done better than other sectors so far. So yeah, but I can't speak to it very deeply.
That's okay. Air Force One is a Boeing aircraft, I believe. So that helps to answer the question. Thank you.
Great question. Anita, before I give the floor back to Vince to make a final comment, did you want to make any comments about the team that's put this program together and what the next steps are?
We don't have a firm date yet for the next one, but the whole point of this was to create an ongoing series of webinars beneficial to manufacturers and exporting manufacturers in particular. So a lot of companies manufacture, but they, as Elizabeth likes to say, you know, they're literally like walking away from gold because the world is our oyster. So we want to help manufacturers who haven't previously exported learn how to do that. And we want to address the needs and provide information and create a forum for manufacturers who are already exporting. So we're looking at what the best spacing is going to be for this. You know, ultimately, we'd probably like to do it once a month, but it'll probably be once a quarter initially, and then maybe once every 2 months. You know, we'll let you all know. And Elizabeth, do you have other thoughts on that?
I think we're on track. Vince mentioned foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses. That could be an interesting topic that could be valuable for companies.
And David Harlow, who would have been here, would have been probably talking about it and will in the future. Jeff Darr, did you have a final comment as well? I saw your message. Thank you. And he may not be able to speak. I see her, but you're just unmute yourself. Not unable, maybe. No, Jeffrey Darr is the advisor.
I'm here. Just had to get myself unmuted. So, hi everybody. Let me add maybe the most important point. We have well over 50 people on our webinar today, which is amazing. If you're not a member of Global Chamber, which I know some of you are not, hopefully this will give you an idea of the value of becoming a member. We're one of the easiest groups to be a member of. As you've heard, this group, unlike others, focuses on actually helping members and helping members make connections and get business opportunities. So if you're interested in becoming a member, I just think it's a good way to close, if you don't mind. That's what we're a membership organization. I would urge you to contact Doug, and Doug has put his contact information, I think, in the chat, and also Sarita, myself, any of the people you've heard identified, reach out to us, and we're happy to get you going. And I know that Doug, if you're interested, will give you a short trial membership so you can quickly see if there's value for being a member, and you'll see there is, and then come and join and be active. And in addition, we do have an advisory board for the Los Angeles area. That's another great way to get involved. Plus, we have a number of, as you've seen, very active committees of the advisory board that are putting on webinars such as today and many other things, including we've had in-person meetings as further ways to network. So just urge everyone to get connected. That's why we're here. And we want you to be, part of the Global Chamber tribe. So thank you.
we do have a monthly virtual call for the LA chapter amongst all of the 700 plus events that we do, but mainly we connect and strategically connect. And I've just really enjoyed, Vince, your conversation today from Valley Stream to the Valley to the world.
Yeah.
You're able to help people. And so congratulations and thank you for your great work. Do you have some final comments before?
I just want to thank you all. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Happy to continue the discussion.
Well, that's very New York of you to keep it short and sweet. But thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. I did mention the global real estate conversation that we're having later today. And Anita mentioned the Export-Import Forum that we do monthly. That's tomorrow. And League of Extraordinaries. I'll leave you with this note and kind of building on what Jeff Darr mentioned. I'm the founder of Global Chamber. I founded it in Carlsbad, California, of all places, after I'd had a bad experience with San Diego World Trade Center. And I just thought, these people don't understand that exporters need help, not where they are necessarily, but somewhere else to get a client. And I didn't feel like the conversation I'd had that day was additive to that goal that I thought was necessary. As an exporter myself with the DuPont company for decades, I thought there needed to be something to support people who were doing trade. And that's what Global Chamber was founded to be 10 years ago. We're not perfect. We work very hard to be better, but we are working hard every day to support people who are doing trade. It's hard work. And the people you saw today are part of what keeps me going and gives me inspiration to keep getting better to help more people be successful globally. It's not just for business, but it's also better for the world to be connected in so many different ways. Thank you for being connected today. Hope to see you again. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Nice to see you.
You too. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks,
Tomorrow
Anita.
at noon.
Thanks,
Bye.
Anita.
Thank you.
It seemed to come together despite the last change with
David.
David.
Yeah.